Hey, my name is Home Slice Henry. I'm one of the official casters for the Pokemon Go Championship Series, and welcome to More Slice Henry. This is my second channel where I primarily make content related to the Championship Series, or like in today's video, educational content about Pokemon Go PvP. Today's video is going to be an extensive and thorough Master League VOD review. I had a battler who's sitting around 2600 ELO in the Master League, so a bit of a veteran, submit 2 sets, and today we're going to be doing an exhaustive and thorough deep dive into their gameplay, talking about the things they do well, the thought processes that can help people play better, not just in the Master League, but in any league, and to try and point out the plays that are holding them back from progressing further to expert or even legend rank. So today's video is probably going to be a bit of a long one since we do have 2 sets and I have not sped up the footage at all. I also have not looked at the footage whatsoever. I wanted to go into it with a fresh face so that way I don't have any like advanced knowledge of things that I can just talk about what I would think about or what I would assume is in the back based on what I'm seeing, kind of as if I'm playing the battle myself. The team that our battler is playing today is a very basic, strong, standard Master League meta team. Xerneas lead, Lunala, and Reshiram in the back. Xerneas, in my eyes, is clearly the best fairy type in the Master League, as it's the only fairy type that actually beats the dragons like Reshiram and Zekrom. And this team has arguably 2 of the best Master League save switches in the back with Reshiram and Lunala. Now, as we move into game number 1, it's a very, very good lead here. Xerneas into Zekrom, but immediately you have to be thinking, what is the opponent going to do? Staying in seems pretty unlikely unless they are very core broken by the Xerneas. Because Zekrom, while it can do about half HP here with a Fusion Bolt is really not going to set up any kind of a farm down, so Xerneas is always going to have a massive, massive advantage. So if they're pivoting out, what are they going to be pivoting into, and how do you have a plan? Well, I would say it's highly likely they're going to be pivoting into either Lunala or Reshiram. Even though Reshiram is a dragon, it's a fire dragon, so it takes neutral from fairy. I'm going to be recording this all in one take, so you're going to hear me misspeak and correct it. Normally, I would edit that out, but today, you're just getting unfiltered Home Slice Henry. So, it is a fire dragon type, not a fairy dragon type, which means it takes neutral from fairy, so Reshiram could actually be a switch-in. And Reshiram switches into Xerneas lead can actually be quite uncomfortable for the Xerneas, because usually you end up taking some pretty significant damage. Or it's going to be the Lunala. Having a game plan for either one is very, very helpful. Right off the bat, thinking through it, if I'm them, if I see the Reshiram switch in, the backline isn't necessarily weak to a Zekrom unless the Zekrom has a shield advantage. So if it is the Reshiram, I'd probably stay in with the Xerneas, wait for them to fire off a Fusion Flare, no shield to Fusion Flare, double close combat, and then look to send in my own Reshiram. If it's Lunala, I think I'm instantly pivoting into the Reshiram. Now, this Reshiram does not have Crunch. It is Draco Meteor. However, due to Reshiram only taking neutral from all of Lunala's charge attacks, if you switch fast enough, you should be able to make it to the back-to-back Fusion Flares and try and win the zeros. Even if you don't end up winning the matchup and they go down shields to win switch, I don't really feel like you would need switch into a Zekrom lead. So that would be how I would kind of play it out based on what I'm expecting to see switched in here. Let's see what our battler does. Okay, clock hit 0, got my coffee, it's Lunala safe switch, and right away we don't pivot out. Now this has already gone from a pretty rough lead into what I would argue is a pretty advantageous position for the opponent. Now, the opponent actually CMP ties here, Shadow Ball to the Moonblast. Had they not thrown right away, they could have potentially gotten a free Shadow Claw, but already that's a lot of health lost on the Xerneas. Moonblast is not going to knock out, but it's going to be putting a serious dent into Lunala. There's the shield, and now we switch into the mirror. It looks like the internet connection is struggling a little bit in this game. This is where not having vetted the footage prior is a little bit unfortunate. So it does look like they didn't miss any turns, which is very good, but the visuals there did look a little bit odd. Opponent switch timer should be up here momentarily. What is this? Okay. Looks like we have, some definite internet connection issues. Looks like they banked some energy on their Lunala and then pivoted into the final Pokemon, which is Reshiram. So this is a game where there's identical backlines, but a very winning lead for our battler. Now, Lunala is going to be able to make the back-to-back Shadow Balls, which is really nice. Right here, personally, I think I would probably just stay in with the Lunala and force them to fire off energy, because that's generally going to make life very uncomfortable. So we actually pivot into the Xerneas, and I'm going to talk about why I actually don't love this play. Now, me personally here, my thought process is based on this health range, once the shield advantage has been obtained, they're never really going to be able to farm down Lunala. So you can kind of stay in, force them to throw energy, and then bring in that very low health Xerneas to force the final charge attack, and then you've set up your Draco Meteor Reshiram in the 1-0s. They have some energy on Lunala, but not a lot, and they have a Zekrom, which is going to end up getting destroyed by the Draco Meteor. Whereas if you pivot out right away, then Reshiram can fire off energy. The Reshiram actually doesn't overfarm as much as they could have, but you do end up in a situation where now you don't have your switch available to you. So Fusion Flare will take the knockout. I assume they just bring back in the Lunala, but if they do, they're going to be switch locked and the opponent's going to be able to pivot out and send in the Zekrom. Timer hits 0, there's Lunala, and there's the pivot out. So by switching there when arguably the battler didn't have to, it does make this endgame a little bit more complicated. Zekrom actually goes for the charge attack priority tie. Since it's locked into a Shadow Ball and not a Moonblast, this is definitely a no shield scenario. And now the Reshiram should be able to overfarm enough to take home this win. The opponent still has all 3 Pokemon left alive, but Reshiram will be able to farm this into a range where the Fusion Flare will actually be able to knock out the Zekrom, make a Fusion Flare into the Lunala, and the Reshiram should be pretty low as well. So arguably in game number 1, I still think it's decently likely, as long as the energy management is good, that this game will end in a win. But not quite knowing where the opposing Lunala's energy is at, because of that weird connection issue in the mid game, is going to complicate the ability to overfarm just a little bit. So Reshiram, pretty close to a charge attack. Opponent's going to be waiting down their timer. Are they going to be bringing in the Lunala? No, they bring in the Reshiram. Reshiram going to try for a farm down here. Opponent pivots out, and now you can just double up on the Fusion Flares, and that should be a winning game. The opponent tried to make a move with the Reshiram. They were unable to get there. It looks like they were not on Crunch, and they were on potentially Draco Meteor, so they didn't end up firing off energy. From the amount of residual energy that they had, they should have been able to make a Fusion Flare at least, or a Crunch, but I guess they're running the more expensive move. So game number 1 does end in a win. But I think even in wins, it is important to try and talk through the potential ways that a battler could have played a little bit better, just because it can make an endgame a little bit cleaner, whereas if the opponent had Crunch on a Reshiram, we actually end up losing that game. So even though it was a winning lead with identical backlines, the opponent was kind of able to better maneuver that endgame, and that made life very, very uncomfortable for us. Okay, I also did not edit out queue times as well, so we are moving into game number 2, Xerneas into Lunala. I would argue this is a catastrophically bad matchup for the Xerneas, just because Xerneas is always going to get outpaced here, and it always just feels very, very clunky. Ideally, as the Xerneas, I think best case scenario is you fire off the Moonblast, they fire off the Shadow Ball, and then you have to immediately pivot out. You can't ever really afford to stay in and fully play out the matchup, because you're never going to get to land a second charge attack, because Lunala is always going to get to outpace. However, this team doesn't really have a super comfortable switch into a Lunala outside of an instant switch into a Reshiram. Lunala throwing immediately would actually be quite nice. So the opponent could have made life a little bit more awkward here if they didn't throw on 7 and instead overfarm to throw on 10. But by throwing on Shadow Ball, that actually gives Xerneas the ability to pivot out. Xerneas does throw an alignment. Honestly, I think I would have taken the Geomancy, fired off the Geomancy and the move, just because you do give a free Shadow Claw over to the opponent, and now I assume we are going to see an immediate pivot out here. Moonblast lands, there's the pivot into Lunala. Going to be answered with Dialga. This matchup is not the most comfortable for Lunala, but being up a little bit of energy does go a pretty long way, because Dialga, it is very fast spamming out Iron Heads, and obviously Roar of Time would be catastrophic. Dialga does put up an early shield. The fact that they're shielding that early when they're not really threatened by a Shadow Ball leading to a farm down does surprise me just a little bit. Dialga goes for the charge attack priority tie. This to me implies that they are going for the Roar of Time. So the shield does come up and they do go for the Roar of Time. Now, the reason why it implies that they would go for the Roar of Time is they're trying to maximize the overfarm. You would never throw a bait that doesn't knock out on a charge attack priority tie here because it's too risky. If they end up no shielding, then you're going to be hit with a second Shadow Ball, and judging by the fact that they shielded, they really don't like Lunala. So our battler does make a good read of recognizing that if they're going for the charge attack priority tie here, they would never ever risk going for the Iron Head. This is always going to be the Roar of Time. So that ends up being a very nice play. I think regardless of what happens right here, even before I see what happens with the Shadow Ball, I'm always hard pivoting the Reshiram. This is going to be a completely energy dry Lunala. I think keeping it on the field is kind of pointless. So I would really love to see, whether it's shielded or not, a pretty immediate pivot into the Reshiram once the timer's up. Timer is up. We're going to stay on the field with the Lunala. They make a move, and Lunala is just going to let it go. I believe Reshiram probably could have sniped down there before the Iron Head was reached. Iron Head still wouldn't have done a lot to Reshiram, though. The opponent just stays in. They don't pivot out, so they do concede that farm down. They could bring in their own Lunala if they're trying to snipe down before it's ready, and that's exactly what they're going to do. The Shadow Claws do quite a bit. Now you're almost forced to bring in the Xerneas, just because Lunala can make a charge attack into the Reshiram. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. In comes the Xerneas. Lunala, are they going to throw the energy? They actually do. So now it's going to be a Reshiram up one turn in the one shield, and it's going to have to win versus whatever's in the back. Shadow Ball will take the knockout. We already saw the Dialga. It's Palkia in the back, and unfortunately that game is going to be a loss. I think that this game was actually a lot more playable if, as we go back, and we know that this game is already going to be over here, but as we go back to a pretty decisive moment in the match in my eyes, was the decision after the cap tie to stay on the field. We didn't pivot out of the matchup, and in doing so, we let them make an Iron Head into the Lunala, and we ended up losing so much of our Lunala. It was right here. The clock was up, but we ended up staying in instead of pivoting in the Reshiram, trying to get up energy, because we basically threw away a ton of Lunala. We almost got no value out of 50% of that Pokemon, because we took an Iron Head, and then we just fed farm to their Lunala, which forced us to throw away the Xerneas. So I think being more aggressive here and trusting in the fact that in this iteration of the Master League, as long as you're running the good mons like Lunala and Reshiram, switch advantage matters a lot less. Being more decisive here and pivoting out and not just letting this half of a Lunala completely go to waste, I think could have completely flipped this game on its head. Whereas, unfortunately, we ended up in an endgame where Palkia just completely ran us over. Okay. Next match, we have Xerneas into Dialga. Very frequently, Dialgas like to stay in this matchup because it is pretty playable for them. Close combat does hit for super effective damage, but importantly, you need quite a few Geomancies to put it into close combat range, so Dialga does have the ability to play this out. There are a few ways, arguably, that the Xerneas can play it out, because Iron Head does not pick up the one-hit KO unless you're close combat debuffed. Xerneas can look to overfarm and tank the Iron Head, losing a lot of its health, but still, to put it in VGC terms, almost having its focus sash intact, because you're just never Dragon Breathing down a Xerneas and then firing off the close combats. You could also close combat immediately and then just look to shield, trusting in the fact that since they can't do any fast move damage, you're always just going to have a very healthy Xerneas. I don't really think one way is better than the other. I think it basically comes down to each battler's own personal play style, but those are kind of the two ways that I would see it played out. I basically would never throw a Moonblast here. Looks like the Dialga is overfarming massively. Here, we are already over 100. I don't like this. Our opponent is waiting for us to throw energy. It is not worth going over 100. Not only did we go over 100, because Geomancy is 13 energy. So if you do 8 Geomancy, you're at 104. We went 1 Geomancy past that. We did a 9th Geomancy, which is 117. That's 17 energy down the drain because we simply never threw it. This is a very big problem because now the Dialga is at 2 Iron Heads. So Dialga definitely wins this trade. I think if you're worried about taking the Iron Head, you could potentially close combat here, and after they no shield, catch onto the Reshiram. That is definitely an option if you're not wanting to use a shield, or you can just close combat shield and then pivot out into the Reshiram because they're going to be very, very low. There's a lot of options, but I think the way that it was played here arguably plays into the opponent's hands because you're throwing a bunch of Geomancies and you're getting no value out of it. All you're getting is the damage. The energy is just going into the void because you can't go over 100. They're now with the back-to-back Iron Heads, so they can just throw it here, and now we're in a really rough spot. We lost a bunch of energy because we farmed past 100. We lose charge attack priority, which means we lose the energy unless we go down a shield. So in a winning lead matchup, we have given our opponent a shield advantage, and we've lost almost our entire Xerneas. So for them, this is absolutely a winning trade. I would be very shocked if they ended up putting up a shield here, because they've definitely got the better of this Xerneas. So close combat is going to be no shielded. They get farmed down, but they got so much value out of that Dialga. The opponent sends in a Psychic type, Mewtwo is a Pokemon I have not seen in the Master League for a very long time, mostly because it is just not very good right now. Moonblast is going to be shielded. Here, I would probably pivot out, because if this thing is on Shadow Ball, it would obviously inflict huge damage into Lunala, so I'd probably just hard pivot into the Reshiram. You've already seen the Dialga. May as well just get Reshiram on the field. Like here, I really, really dislike how this was played. My question is, why are we giving a Shadow Mewtwo a huge energy farm down? This is a Master League where I said it in game one, and I'm just going to keep saying it. Switch advantage matters significantly less if you're running the good Mons, and we're running the good Mons. There's no reason to concede a farm down there because we don't actually have that dominant of a matchup. If they're on Shadow Ball, we are going to lose that exchange because of the huge head start that we gave them. We gave them a massive, massive head start, whereas had we saved that Xerneas and then insta-pivoted into the Reshiram, Reshiram eats a Side Strike, so that's pretty fine, and we could have set up our backline a lot better. Whereas now, this Mewtwo could very easily run away with the game. We bring in Lunala, but this is very, very scary. We try for a catch onto the Reshiram. They can build up to the back-to-back Side Strikes, and our entire Reshiram is gone. They have back-to-back Side Strikes, which means that our Reshiram is just KO'd. We have completely lost our Reshiram because we didn't end. Oh, and they're going to overfarm too. That's such a nice play from them. But we've completely lost our Reshiram because we didn't aggressively pivot. We conceded a huge farm down, and the Mewtwo is even going to get a shield off the Lunala. In the back is Ho-Oh, and we are not winning this endgame. Ho-Oh is just too good. Like, Lunala can throw. Lunala should have thrown when it got to 100 there because it would have been good charge attack timing. But even with that, the Ho-Oh was just too far ahead, where the Ho-Oh is now at 80 energy. So the Ho-Oh will be able to throw one Incinerate, fire off the Sacred Fire. They end up throwing on alignment here, but either way, the math still works out for them always to outpace. They're going to land the Brave Bird after firing off the Sacred Fire first. And unfortunately, this game will end in defeat. And we ended up having to lose the entire Reshiram simply because we didn't end up aggressively pivoting. Now, the opponent bringing in the Mewtwo, they were just trying to get as much farm as possible, and in letting that farm happen, we basically played into their hands. So that would be, I think, the big lesson from game number 2, is just not giving opponents those farm downs. There is no need, especially with Dialga off the field, what is going to hard punish that Reshiram switch in? The answer realistically is nothing. You can tank a Side Strike, threaten knockouts with flares. They would end up having to go down resources to get rid of the Reshiram. And even if you end up just sacrificing the Reshiram in exchange for a shield advantage, then you have Lunala up a shield, which does actually beat the Ho-Oh. And you would still have the Xerneas in case you wanted to go for a catch endgame. So I think that is the big learning from game number 2, is just be aggressive with your good Mons in the Master League. There is no reason to give that farm down, because all it does is just set up that Mewtwo, and the Mewtwo, which isn't even a particularly strong Pokemon in the Master League right now, if you give it a Side Strike for free, then it absolutely is. So just ensuring that you're not setting up your opponent and playing to your opponent's win cons will generally make life a lot easier for you. Okay, game number 3. I'm probably going to lose track of where we're at in terms of the games throughout the course of this as well. So we'll do our best to follow along. Okay, this is a bad lead. Xerneas into Kyogre. We don't have a water resist on this team. Kyogre can win the zeros just by landing Origin Pulse. Xerneas can connect with a Moonblast, but Kyogre does tank it very, very comfortably. So for the opponent, this already works out as a pretty nice lead. Moonblast is no shielded. The Kyogre can overfarm quite extensively, and because we don't have an Origin Pulse resist, we're almost forced into just letting this go and hoping the opponent makes a misplay and goes for an Avalanche. No shield comes out. There's the Origin Pulse. And because they overfarmed, they are going to get an Avalanche into whatever we have in the back. Arguably here, I'd probably go into the Lunala because I think we would get slightly more farm. They do bring in the Lunala, which is quite nice, because Lunala should exit with a full Shadow Ball. So even though you're going to end up down a shield, you have a charge attack to get that shield back. So I still feel like it ends up being a somewhat okay trade. Kyogre is frequently paired with Fairy types. So there's probably a Xerneas or a Zacian lurking somewhere in the back. What do you know? There's the Zacian. Okay. Gonna farm up to the back-to-back Shadow Balls. Arguably, I would have loved to see this thrown slightly before the back-to-back Shadow Balls were reached, just for efficiency's sake. I do believe, because right here, you're very close to 100. So throwing right before 100 would have been better, because some energy does go to waste, just because when you build up to 100, unless you have the perfect amount of residual, you're going to be going slightly over 100. I might say, Henry, this is nitpicking, but it could come back later in the game to matter. So I do think throwing right here instead of throwing at 100 would be a lot better, just because there isn't a reason to build up to the back-to-back there. There isn't really any pressure from the Zacian, because the Zacian still has a ways to go before it makes the Behemoth Blade. Zacian does end up no-shielding. Lunala fires off another Shadow Ball. This will be pressuring away a shield from the opponent. I think here, now that Lunala is energy dry, there's a very real case to be said for pivoting into the Reshiram. Reshiram will probably get hit with a close combat, but I think I would almost prefer that rather than staying in and letting this Zacian overfarm massively. Because arguably, okay, we do see an immediate pivot out here. So I do think this is a pretty decent play. You're always going to be hit with a close combat, but I think that's fine. I think Reshiram is always okay just letting this go. So I like the way that our battler is playing this. Close combat does do quite a lot of damage. There's a Dragon Tail Groudon in the back, and we're going to be full sending Draco Meteor. Arguably, the more consistent way to play this endgame would be to fire off the double fusion flares, but in an endgame where you feel like you're behind, I don't mind just trying to go for the Hail Mary here. So Reshiram will go for the Draco Meteor. Draco Meteor does get shielded. That's a little bit tragic. And part of why I call it a Hail Mary is if you end up failing that play, then you end up losing the game on the spot. So it is basically a play where you're saying, I am deciding this game based on the outcome of the shielding decision, rather than potentially going for the double flare and then trying to set up an end game where you're able to make a move on the Lunala. But let's count. I'll be honest, I was not doing the best job of counting when they sent in the Groudon, see how much the Groudon got. Because our Lunala was completely energy dry. They get 2 Dragon Tails, 3 Dragon Tails, because I believe it is 5-5-4 2 Precipice Blades. Now that is testing my knowledge a bit because I haven't seen a Dragon Tail Groudon in a bit. But they do end up getting 6. So it looks like Lunala could potentially make it to a Shadow Ball here if Lunala is 6 off. As long as the Precipice Blades does get shielded. Here, they're just going to call the bait. Opponent full sends the Precipice Blades. I think if we end up double flaring, it puts us in a spot where there's more of a win con rather than the game being decided on that shield call. It was always going to be a bit of a tough end game there, but I honestly didn't mind how that game was played overall. It just ended up being a little bit tricky in that end game. Okay. Move to the next match here. Obviously, very bad lead, leading the Xerneas into the Zacian. I like the instant pivot into Lunala. I definitely prefer, against these Zacian teams, save switching the Lunala and saving the Reshiram for the back. Now, the reason why that is because a Fusion Flare from Reshiram does not pick up the one-hit knockout. It does a ton of damage, don't get me wrong, but it misses the knockout, and the Dragon Breasts are triple resisted due to the Fairy Steel subtyping. Not subtyping, the Fairy Steel typing, so you're never really going to be able to farm down a Zacian. But by save switching Lunala, if they end up staying in for a little bit, you can get a little bit of chip damage onto the Zacian, and then suddenly endgame, they are actually in a range where you could farm down. They stay in for a little bit. They bring in a Shadow Claw Kyurem Black. Gonna farm up to the Moonblast, bait with the Shadow Ball. I honestly don't mind this bait. The opponent is never going to be letting this through. The alignment is too favorable for them, so it's a very safe time to get a shield, and then you're just always going to end up losing charge attack priority to the Kyurem. Opponent plays inefficiently there. They could have gone for the Captai just to get a little bit of extra energy. But either way, this game is trending in a pretty negative direction because so far they are ABA weak to Reshiram. Kyurem loses to Reshiram because it's not on Dragon Tail, it's on Shadow Claw. And the Zacian is also going to be struggling there as well. As the Xerneas player here, you are trying to throw your close combat as soon as you can possibly get it. You're never shielding the Xerneas because the Xerneas doesn't have value into a Zacian team. So you're letting this go. I think even close combating on alignment is fair. And, the close combat is reached. That's really helpful because now they're gone or their final shield is out of the way. And either one is pretty favorable. Close combat takes the knockout. Immediate pivot into the Reshiram. And it's Palkia in the back. So a tricky endgame, but to me, it doesn't feel unwinnable. The goal for Reshiram is probably going to be Fusion Flare into a farm down. If Reshiram can Fusion Flare into a farm down, then Reshiram is in a pretty decent spot. You don't really want to torpedo your attack stat by full sending the Draco Meteor there, so Reshiram will fire off the flare. Palkia does put up the shield, But still for Reshiram, I still think the call is probably just to go for another Fusion Flare. Fusion Flare does not do a lot, but if you can keep your attack stat intact, then it will put you in a better spot as you try and navigate the end game. So Reshiram will go for the Draco Meteor. Flare wouldn't have quite knocked out here, but I think trying to Dragon Breath it into Flare range would probably be the win con, whereas now it's very heavily reliant on catching a close combat. And catching a close combat is a little bit dicey because the opponent here actually makes a pretty massive misplay. And let me talk about what that is. So the opponent here, realistically, they are under no threat from a double debuffed Fusion Flare. So as the opponent, you have no reason to throw until you build up to the back-to-back close combats. So this game will end up being a win just because it is at like the 2600 elo bracket. But if the opponent here had a better understanding of their endgame win cons, then they would know they simply never have to throw a Zacian, because a -2 Fusion Flare is not going to do nearly enough. That's a very easy survive. So for Zacian, you can always overfarm massively. But this player, I guess, maybe forgot about the fact that after the Draco Meteor, it would be at -2. They end up throwing immediately, and that actually just ends up giving a complete win con because now they're going to be debuffed. They have to try and fully undercharge this. They don't fully undercharge it, and they have lost the game. So the opponent a little bit lost the plot here when it came to trying to figure out the end game, because instead of the Reshiram being -2 attack, now the Reshiram's attack stat is restored. The Zacian's at -2 defense, and the Fusion Flare is going to knock out. So this game ends up being a win. I do think that this game, it's obviously a very tricky team comp, but I do believe that if the opponent played it correctly, there wasn't really an ability to win that game, which is always kind of tricky. Like, it is a very difficult team composition, but getting the shield advantage was definitely what you would want to see. Okay, next match. Ooh, Xerneas into Keldeo. This is an incredibly dominant lead. This game should always end in a win. Keldeo has very little play into Xerneas and has absolutely no play into Lunala. So right off the bat, if you have an ability to throw away Reshiram in the mid game, I think that will probably work out. It's a save switch into Gholdengo. I already don't like that we're staying in. There's no reason to stay in here as Xerneas. This is your opportunity. Throw away the one Mon that Keldeo has a winning matchup into. Send in the Reshiram, launch some Fusion Flares. You don't care about switch even a little bit. Your entire goal is just get rid of the Reshiram, and then your opponent cannot possibly win the game because Xerneas and Lunala, it doesn't matter if you have switch advantage. But we're staying in, and we're throwing a Moonblast. I really dislike this. Gholdengo does not have strong stats, so even though it does resist Moonblast, it's still going to do a lot of damage, but I assume we're going to do that and then pivot. Oh, we actually get a Moonblast debuff, so we end up getting very, very lucky there. But I'm still not a fan of how this is played out because we had an ability to throw away the Reshiram and have a completely unlosable game, but we haven't, and now this is where life gets a little bit tricky. That Shadow Ball, I assume without the Moonblast debuff, probably knocks out, and Gholdengo just ends up winning this matchup and then putting Keldeo on a Reshiram. So we ended up going for a play that basically only pays off due to the fact that we got a Moonblast debuff. So that's why I really think just playing for getting rid of the one Mon that Keldeo like has a winning matchup into would have been a lot better. Whereas now we pivot into Lunala, but considering our opponent's leading Keldeo, they should have a decent answer to Lunala in the back. I assume it's probably going to be a lesser dragon with Crunch or their own Lunala. So they're going to bring in their own Lunala. They are down energy, so the opponent is still in a negative spot, but this game could have been so much more simple if the Reshiram was put onto that Gholdengo. If the opponent can farm down, this could get a little bit scary. Looks like they cannot. They know it. They will fire off energy. Arguably here, I think you always just let this go. Now, the reason why I'm not a big fan of that shield is even though you're able to take the knockout, I think the cleaner win con in this scenario would have been to let it go, Dragon Breath down with the Reshiram, just one shield Dragon Breath down, and then just Draco Meteor the Keldeo, and then you're in a pretty nice spot. Whereas now, if the Keldeo is ever able to like get the full farm down, then things could get a little bit uncomfortable here. Now, I know low kick really not going to do much. In comes Gholdengo. It's a simultaneous knockout there. And it's Keldeo versus that Reshiram. Reshiram is always going to make the Draco Meteor before Keldeo gets the 2 charge stacks, even with the 1 low kick head start. So Reshiram should always just be winning in the end game. But I do really feel that this battler kind of made it more complicated than it needed to be. Whereas if you put that Reshiram on a winning matchup, then it doesn't matter what the opponent has in the back because there aren't real core breakers to Lunala plus Xerneas, with the exception of Metagross. And even if it is something like a Metagross in the back, I still feel like that is very, very playable. Okay, we move to the next match. We skipped ahead 30 seconds and it went perfectly right to the start of the battle. Reshiram versus Xerneas is probably the matchup that defines this current Master League the most. Reshiram versus Xerneas is a very neutral matchup and can be played out many different ways. As the Xerneas, you only win the zeros via a double close combat. At this point of playing out this meta, people are very familiar with the matchup, so if you have a Lunala in the back, as the Reshiram player, firing off the Fusion Flare and then catching one of the close combats onto Lunala can be a way to get your Lunala on the field and waste some energy while preserving Reshiram energy. So there's always a bit of a dance here as to what you end up going for in this matchup. And again, we end up going over 100. I really, really dislike this. I think it is significantly better if you're expecting your opponent to try and overfarm, because Reshiram does win charge type priority here. Let's say I reach here and they haven't thrown. I am clicking the close combat. Because your opponent has very high incentive to CMP tie Fusion Flare to your second close combat. Now, a quiz for the viewers at home. Is there a Mon in the back that would like to take a Fusion Flare? The answer is yes. And that Mon is Reshiram. So here, I really dislike going over 100, trying to wait for them to throw, because you are actively getting no value out of your Geomancies. It's the second time we've seen this done, and I think this is a habit that our battler will have to break. Close combating, and then just hard pivoting the Reshiram, assuming the opponent knows I have to CMP tie or I'm going to end up losing the matchup. You can go for a catch there onto the Reshiram. Additionally, even at -2 defense, a Fusion Flare doesn't KO you. So another option could be, I'm going to close combat, get some nice damage, lose charge type priority, let it go, and then fire off my second close combat because I'm locked into it on the CMP tie. And then even though I'd be very low, I would still have won the lead. So I think either play, like, I don't really have a preference. Actually, now that I think about it, I think my preference is probably if they overfarm to close combat and catch on to the Reshiram. But I do believe that either way of going about it would be better than what our battler does. Our battler, I think, is very reactive rather than proactive, which can be the case for a lot of players. Is you're kind of waiting for your opponent to make the play and you can respond. Being proactive about your games and making your opponent respond to what you do will frequently lead to them making misplays, and those are misplays that you can punish. So we end up over farming a ton, but Reshiram has 12-11 pacing. So by farming up, we are way past 100. But they're now at the back-to-back Fusion Flares, and they win charge tech priority. This is that Dialga situation all over again, where now as we click close combat, they're just going to click Fusion Flare, win charge tech priority here, and we have to go down a shield. So already, these are the consequences of over-farming and waiting for them to throw. We are basically, in this scenario, waiting for our opponent to play suboptimally. But if our opponent doesn't play suboptimally, then we're in a negative spot. Whereas there are ways that you can play it, and you can create lines and like play patterns of how you want to play it, even if they overfarm. But this just puts us in a spectacularly negative position. Whereas the Reshiram player is always just going to be letting this go. The Reshiram player got big damage. They got a shield advantage. They don't really care. They can even stay because they're not getting Geomancy down. This is going to force another charge attack out of this Xerneas. So this is just never, ever going to be shielded in 1,000 years by the Reshiram. Because despite the fact that we had a winning lead matchup, we have set ourselves up to where we're -2 defense. We have very little residual energy, and we're down a shield. And look at the top right. What's coming in here? The Mon that's going to sweep us. And that is Lunala. We're going to stay in with the Xerneas. Xerneas locks in and does make the Moonblast, but even making the Moonblast doesn't do a lot for us because this is a guaranteed shield from the Lunala. Well, I was going to say it should be a guaranteed shield. The opponent makes a very large error here, which could let us back in the game potentially. In my eyes, there's no reason to ever let that go unless the opponent maybe miscounted and didn't realize that it was a Moonblast. But as the Lunala player, it is worth the risk to go down the shield to basically have a Lunala that is up 6 Shadow Claws and basically at full health. That is unbeatable in the Master League. But I guess maybe due to a miscount, they end up letting this go. And suddenly, all might not be lost. I still think our battler is in a losing position because of how they played out the lead. But the opponent no shielding there. If they shielded, the game was over. There was nothing that could have been done. May as well just set the phone down. Because they no shielded, maybe there's a world, but it's still looking pretty bleak. In comes Reshiram, because Reshiram can actually take a move. And we are going to win this game. Because there's a Keldeo in the back. Now, right here, that should always be a catch. That should always be a catch. Keldeo is 5 to the move. I assume they were staying in to go for the catch, but you should always catch this. Bank the energy and catch it. Do not desync the timers. This desyncs the timers. You have a completely winning matchup here. You stayed in for too long. You desynced the timers, and you ended up taking this damage when it never should have landed here. So throwing 9 DBs and doing a catch and sneak onto the Lunala would have been a lot better. But staying in just desyncs the timers, so we ended up throughout the course of this game basically helping our opponent. We ended up farming over 100, letting them get us debuffed and at a shield disadvantage. They kind of let us back in the game by no-shielding the Moonblast, and then we have a guaranteed win of just put Lunala on, like, you are a Ghost Psychic type. Put it on the Keldeo and win. Staying into Draco Meteor, in my eyes, accomplishes nothing. Because the Keldeo will respect this because you're staying into Draco Meteor, and then the timers are desynced enough that as you bring in Lunala, like, their Lunala is kind of going to feast. So, even despite the very favorable endgame alignment, we are bringing them back into this game. Aqua Jet lands. They will make another Aqua Jet, and then the timer will be up. Now, their play is basically just to try and take advantage of the fact that the Lunala is going to be in Shadowclaw downrange. The opponent's goal is now just to try and farm this down. In comes the Lunala. Good prediction there, firing off the Shadow Ball, anticipating the switch in there. That is very nicely done. But even if this ends in a win, and they end up letting it go, so the opponent has just given up. Like, Keldeo is just never sweeping here. So the game ends in a win, but I think from watching this game, it could have been a lot simpler, but we ended up making it a lot more difficult by the way that we played it. So we end up letting this go, and we end up winning, but I do think it is important, even in a win, to point out where our battler could have played a lot cleaner and made life a lot easier for us. Okay, it looks like they had... All right. We have Zern into Zace. Again, they save switch into the Lunala, which is what I like to see with a team like this. Because if they stay, those Shadow Claws, that kind of take away the focus sash of the Zacian almost, where suddenly Zacian is not going to be able to live a Fusion Flare endgame. Firing off Shadow Ball instantly is really nice here. It does allow you to get the turn back. I think as Zacian, the play of no shielding this, instant Behemoth, and then pivoting is a really good play from them. So they no shield. Over farming here, I think, is a misplay from them. I don't think there's a reason to over farm, in my eyes. Because Lunala's always going to be shielding this, because they've gotten through like 90% of Zacian's health. So this is the easiest shield ever. And if they pivot out, which they do, why did you stay in as the opponent? So, I mean, this is a VOD review for the opponent, too. This isn't just a VOD review for our player. I still want to highlight where the opponent's making misplays. As the opponent, there's not a reason to overfarm there, in my eyes. There is just none. When we have the ability to instantly Behemoth and then get Resh on the field. We didn't feel comfortable with sending in the Resh right away, which is fine. But overfarming there, all it does is just give extra energy over to the Lunala and further desync the timers. Like, look at where this timer is. This timer is almost 3/4 up as Resh hits the field. As Lunala, you always fire off the Shadow Ball and then instantly pivot back into the Xerneas. Your opponent has given you the ability to save this Lunala. And we say, thank you, opponent, and we pivot out. That's a really nice play from our player. That's a really nice play from our player. The thing we have to watch for as Xerneas is ensuring that we get some damage onto this Reshiram. So I think if I'm the Xerneas, I'm instant close combating here. Because a Fusion Flare will take the knockout. Oh, we overfarm. Okay. That is where counting matters a lot. It's 12-11 to, like, the Reshiram's Fusion Flare, right? So what is the downside of close combating here? It does less damage, but are they ever going to farm you down? No, they're not. So insta-close combating would have been better because the opponent so severely desynced the timers. Insta-close combating would have been preferred, whereas now we can't ever shield the Xerneas, because if we shield the Xerneas, clock's up, and guess what time it is? It's Zacian time once again. So now this energy just goes down the drain. And that's where the kind of cascading effects of not close combating there, and I guess being not quite on with our counts, really comes back to bite us. Because in a scenario like this, it is actually very easy to keep track of where their energy's at. Because let's go from when they threw, which was right here. The easy way to know where they're at is every Shadow Claw you do, they get 2 DBs. So 1 Shadow Claw, 2 Shadow Claw, 3 Shadow Claw, 4 Shadow Claw, 5 Shadow Claws. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So they're 1 off their move. So they're at 11. And this is genuinely how I count in games. So I know they're now at 11. And we pivot into the Xerneas. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Because they can only do 11 there. They're 1 off of the Fusion Flare. So throwing that close combat would have allowed us to get some damage onto this Reshiram and just put us in a lot better of a spot. Whereas by not close combating, we end up losing all this energy by overcommitting when they could always outpace us there. And so, unfortunately, it just ends up backfiring where now we got 0 value out of the Xerneas switch-in. The goal behind the Xerneas switch-in was to make them waste energy and get damage on it. Now there's basically like a 2/3 HP Reshiram. They still have energy. Now here, I personally always would have brought in the Reshiram. Just because he's still switch-locked. So I think bringing in the Reshiram would have been slightly better. But I still think by losing all of that Xerneas energy, the game is kind of over. Opponent catches onto Zace. This should always be an undercharge. The Zace was 2 over, if I remember correctly. So they would have been at 2 out of 8. And they were pretty low. So this could have been only like 1 line of bubbles and then just farm them down. But by full charging this, they get so much value out of the catch because we don't have an ability to refarm. Like, look at that. It was super low. And now we have lost, which is a little bit unfortunate. Like, there just isn't a way ever to win this game. The Palkia is too far ahead. So I think there were some missed opportunities in this game where we have, in certain circumstances, we have an ability to kind of switch lock Pokemon when they shouldn't be switch locked. And then not getting value out of those switch lock Pokemon kind of allows opponents to better manage that switch timer. Whereas now they just get to land Aqua Tails, and we just can't win because the Palkia is just way too far ahead. We have energy on the Lunala, but it's not going to ever save us because the opponent still has basically a full health Reshiram. They have so much energy on that Reshiram. They have so much health on the Reshiram. So even if we could get rid of the Palkia, which we can, that Reshiram still being alive is just absolutely crushing for us. So throwing the close combat earlier in the game and then being able to get knocked out and then bringing the Reshiram to farm them down and have our dragon be the dragon that's up energy would have put us in a lot better of a spot because the opponent very heavily desynced the timers and that would have been the punish. But unfortunately now we try and snipe, but as long as the opponent's paying attention, which they are, they can deny that snipe and we do end up losing the game. So this is kind of a difficult comp, but I do think it is very playable and the game, if not a win, would have been a lot closer with more optimal play patterns. Okay, we have a Xerneas mirror lead. Now, when I run Xerneas, I always run Best Buddy on it. Now, people might say that's because I only have Xerneas Best Buddied out of my Master League Mons, and that may be correct, but it's really nice to win Charge Attack Priority in a Xerneas mirror. It can set you up very nicely for success. So this battler does not have Best Buddy finished on Xerneas. Opponent does have the badge, but it's not equipped. So you can see 4275 versus 4275. So this is going to be a true coin flip. The opponent CMP ties. If I'm this battler after the CMP tie, because I don't know that I win this matchup, they actually get the Moonblast debuff. I would instantly hard pivot into the Lunala. Let's get up energy on Lunala and make life very uncomfortable for them. Make them react. That is a really nice switch in. Now, the Xerneas is healthier than it should be, but now it's time to do math with Home Slice Henry. I know, you're probably 40 minutes into this video and you said, Henry, you never told me I had to do math. Math in situations like these matters quite a bit. So what does insta-switching the Lunala give us here? I'm struggling with my words. Let me drink some coffee. 1 second. There we go. All right. So what does insta-switching a Lunala give us? Well, the answer is an ability to get up energy. We get a zero-turn switch out of a CMP tie. Our opponent is trapped in the Geomancy while they have to react to what got switched in here. And that gives us a pretty significant energy head start. Now, Zekrom to crunch is 12-11. Now, here we build up to Shadow Ball. We don't build up to the Moonblast, so I assume the opponent just lets this through. And they do because we didn't build up. But where this play backfires is we can't farm down without double shielding. And that's why I don't love going for the Moonblast. Building up would have been better, because as we go back to here, our opponent... I went too far. Okay, here we go. My options for moving back and forth are minus 10 seconds or plus 30 seconds. I don't know why it's not just 10 seconds for both. But they throw a Geomancy, they pause for a turn, and then they send in Zekrom. We're so far ahead that we can make this Moonblast before they make a move. Even if you're baiting, building up to it to guarantee the shield is very important, because the opponent knows, okay, it's just a Shadow Ball. I can always just like no shield this and be okay. I guess the only way insta Shadow Balling makes sense is if you plan on no shielding the Lunala. You're basically saying, I'm going to sacrifice the Lunala if they have crunch and just go for farm on Reshiram. But with the amount they overfarmed, they're probably going to make a move into whatever we send in. So we end up shielding, but we can't farm down. So we put ourselves in a spot. They actually didn't have the move. We put ourselves in a spot where we have to throw or go down 2 shields or lose almost all our health because we didn't build up. The consequences of the instant Shadow Ball end up looming large because we weren't aware of how much of an energy head start we have. And that's why keeping track of like, okay, if I'm up 3 claws, I'm always going to outpace because it's only 7 to get to the Moonblast. So you're just in a really, really nice spot there. Whereas now we're down 2 shields. And if you're down 2 shields in the Master League, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. In comes Reshiram. They're now at 3 because we did 1 Shadow Claw and they sneak 1. So we have the ability to, if we want to, overfarm by 4 claws and fire off our next Shadow Ball. They end up no shielding. Now keep in mind, they still have Xerneas lurking in the back. The moment they no shield, I think I would have pivoted into the Reshiram. And the reason why is we need better fast attack pressure into this Pokemon than what our Lunala can provide. Whereas the longer we stay in with Lunala, the more of an energy head start that the Reshiram gets. So I think that I would have insta-pivoted into the Resh to force them into either taking a ton of damage or pivot back out into the Xerneas. Because Xerneas on the field is fine. What we can't do is let the Reshiram get a huge head start. We're down 2 shields, so we're in a lot of trouble anyway. But I think that by staying in, again, it's basically setting up the opponent for success. So we ball, we do get the shield, there's the pivot into the Xerneas, we end up getting a catch, but as the opponent, they should always just undercharge this and then Geomancy down. They don't undercharge this. So in a lot of these scenarios, we are basically, our opponents making suboptimal plays is keeping us in games. But I think with cleaner play patterns, like obviously we are trying to navigate an endgame down 2 shields, which is always going to be very, very difficult. However, I do still very much believe that it is worth trying to play to outcomes where you're not relying on your opponents making misplays for you to win. Because here, the opponent can always undercharge this, Geomancy down, and then we're in a world of hurt. But catching the Fusion Flare and them not undercharging that puts us in a significantly better spot. We're still probably losing this game, but as timer hits 0, we're always going to send a Reshi in here. We bring in Lunala. This is a bad habit that we have. We need to send in our healthier Mon here. We don't have any kind of fast move pressure. Shadow Claw does nothing on to Reshiram after the catch and waiting down the timer. We need to get Reshi on the field. Get it up energy, make life uncomfortable for them. We've had 2 opportunities now to get Reshi on the field. Like after they like instant no shielded the first Shadow Ball, or after we ended up getting the catch, and we've taken advantage of neither. And now in comes the Xerneas. I actually don't like the opponent pivoting out here, to be honest. I think the opponent is also making misplays. They end up fully sacrificing it. So their play is now just to farm this down. They're never going to throw energy at us. We get damage registration errors, so a bit of good luck does go our way. But if they have Draco Meteor, we're still in a lot of trouble. So now the win con is just hope they don't have Draco Meteor. All right. Fingers crossed, gotta hope. There were a couple opportunities for us to get Resh on the field earlier and prevent them from making the Draco, but by not having Resh on the field, they're just able to get so much energy because our Lunala doesn't have the fast attack pressure. Lunala's all about charge attack pressure that we end up playing into our lose con of them having Draco, and they had it, and it cost us the game. Okay. Moving to the final match. At least I think it's the final match. Wow, we are almost an hour in. My goodness. Okay, we got Xerneas, Kyurem White. Now, Kyurem White, we have pretty, we don't have any terrible matchups here. Obviously, Xerneas is very good into Kyurem White. Kyurem White straight up beats Reshiram in the head-to-head by virtue of it having more HP. So in the 2s, it does end up farming down, but if you get to like a 1 scenario, that's where Reshiram is favored as long as Kyurem White is not up energy, and Lunala is still pretty okay here as well. I wouldn't be surprised if a Lunala gets chucked on the screen momentarily. They're staying in. Okay. This is pretty nice. Xerneas can always survive an Ice Burn. So I think as Xerneas goes for Moonblast right off the bat. I think personally, I probably would have built up to the double close combats and gone for the back-to-back CCs because our opponent shielding a Moonblast does kind of mess with our pacing a little bit. Ice Burn, while it still doesn't one-shot us, would do quite a lot of damage. Oh, did we get a Moonblast debuff there? I think I saw the debuff proc. I'll be honest. I was not looking there. No, we didn't. I don't know what I was looking at here. Clearly, I'm just seeing things. Okay, no Moonblast debuff. They should always double flare here. And that's what they're going to do. And they don't end up throwing their second flare. That is kind of confusing in my eyes. They should always look to get that shield back because now they're going to have to give up both shields. And if they give up both shields, then they've just lost the game because then the Xerneas is just never going to be shielding. So the opponent does make a misplay here. They overfarm too much. Xerneas makes the close combat. This game is over. We are up a shield. It kind of doesn't matter what they send in. We're always pivoting. We are a heavily debuffed Xerneas. Our opponent misplayed there and just let us knock them out instead of throwing their move. But being up a shield, we should always be looking to pivot. It doesn't matter what comes in. If it's a dragon, I don't care if it's Palkia, we're always going Reshiram. And if it's not a dragon, then we're probably just spamming out the Lunala. Yes, insta pivot out. Now, Lunala doesn't have the greatest head-to-head matchup here, but Lunala can throw on 9. And we threw on 8 there. That is a timing error. So we can throw on 9 and have it be perfect timing. And how we know this is right when we do our 7th, that's when the damage lands. So that's our visual cue to say, okay, I can do 2 more here, and then it's going to be perfect charge attack timing. But we only did 1. So we are now missing a Shadow Claw's worth of energy and damage because of that mistime. Shadow Ball, shielded by the Ho-Oh. We are never shielding Lunala in this game. I don't like that. Let me talk to you about why. I think this is a very poor shielding decision. Is there anything in the Master League that beats a Draco Meteor Reshiram up 2 shields? The answer is no. So there's no reason to shield here, especially when even if we don't get debuffed, which is a 50-50 chance, our Shadow Ball's not going to knock out. We are actively making our position worse by shielding this move. They go for the Sacred Fire, 50-50 chance at a debuff. We do get debuffed. Like, we probably still win, but I would still argue that the shield there was largely pointless. Because if you try and think about what could possibly be in the back, like, if we end up no shielding and getting knocked out on Lunala, what is in the back? The answer is nothing. You could say, Henry, what if it's a Rhyperior? We have Draco Meteor. Draco Meteor's knocking it out. And then we are making a second Draco Meteor into the Ho-Oh. What if it's Excadrill? It's getting fusion flared. Nothing is going to win that endgame. And now we're just going to let Lunala go. Okay. So we figure out to let the Lunala go a bit too late. Reshiram should still always win this endgame for us. But I do still feel that, okay. And it's Xerneas, so we end up just winning. No, that is not what we wanted to do. We end up pivoting out of the matchup and giving them a huge head start. Like, there is no reason to pivot out here. We are up energy as Reshiram, and we have a shield. So Reshiram is just always going to win. Giving up your ability to switch is something that can very much come back to cost you here. So right here, there's absolutely no reason to pivot out. This is a pure fairy, which we know is going to be Xerneas into Resh. Resh up a shield just wins this. You just make 2 flares and you win the game. The only way this ever gets weird is if you pivot into your own Xerneas and they like farm you down. So honestly, I still think this is probably winning, but I think there's no reason to ever give up Switch here. Is my frustration with it. Because Moonblast does do quite a lot of damage. They're always going to farm down and exit with a ton of energy. And like, it should still be okay, just because Reshiram and Ho in the back is so dominant. But there's no reason to pivot out of Reshiram there. Reshiram can always make 2 fusion flares. So they fire off close combat. Easy no shield. They fire off close combat number 2. This one will always be the shield, and then Reshiram will always be able to outpace. They go for a Moonblast. That's just an error. They pivot into the Ho-Oh, and yeah, this is a very straightforward game now. Oh, we overfarmed too much and lost. Okay, never mind then. That is a bit unfortunate. Okay, keeping track of residuals there is very helpful, but let's talk through these circumstances that led to this being a loss. We again play to we have Reshiram up a shield. There's never a reason to pivot out here, because even if they make double close combat, we have a shield for that. We are still in a very good spot because we have 12-11 pacing. If they make double close combat, that's 12 to 9, so it's 21. So they can make double close combat, but we just tank 1, shield 1. We throw the first flare, and then we farm up to the back-to-back, or farm up very close to the back-to-back. We can throw mid-Geomancy, they can never catch, and then it's a very straightforward path to victory. But unfortunately, it started to unravel here, where we got a little bit jumpy. We pivoted out of Resh when Resh up a shield is just always winning there. And then in doing so, we got damaged, but we fed them a ton of energy. And that energy had us worried enough that we wanted to double up with Resh into Ho-Oh, and then Ho-Oh made the Brave Bird. So even without seeing the battle, I felt the warning sign immediately when the Xerneas was pivoted in. And unfortunately, it did end up like paying off. Doesn't feel like the right word there, because it's obviously never the goal, but the like avalanche warning signs ended up turning into the avalanche, and it ended up costing us a winning endgame there. Okay, well, that is all of the footage. So if you've made it this far, looks like on my recording, we're 56 minutes in. Oh my goodness. I very much appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something. As always, the goal with these videos is to talk about what the players are doing well and what they can do to improve. I think that the Master League is a meta that once you get comfortable with navigating the matchups and how to play it out, it is a very fun meta. It is one of the most enjoyable Master League metas we've had in quite some time. But I do think that a lot of the lessons behind like not conceding big farm downs and stuff like that can be applicable to other leagues as well. But thank you so much for watching. I mentioned at the start, this is More Slice Henry, my channel where I make content related to the Pokemon Go Championship Series and educational content. If you learned something, if you liked today's video, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And I'll see you guys in the next one.